Tatsuya Shiba's emergence, within the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, does not begin with spectacle or the thunderous descent of a drop pod. It begins in silence. A ripple forms in the fabric of space, as if reality itself hesitates. The moment stretches, then resolves, leaving a lone figure standing on a scorched battlefield. The air is heavy, with the stench of promethium and ionized metal. Above him, the sky churns with ash and distant orbital fire. To Tatsuya, it all registers in an instant. The environmental data, the particulate analysis, the lingering traces of psychic discharge he cannot fully recognize yet. What he does recognize is danger. This galaxy radiates hostility like a furnace. Around him lies the aftermath of a conflict typical of the 41st millennium, meaning brutal, ceaseless, and entirely without mercy. Broken Imperial guard tanks sit half-submerged in muddy craters. Charred bodies, both human and Xenos, lie scattered across trenches, carved by artillery and desperation. Tatsuya steps forward, scanning with that calm, almost clinical precision that defines him. His senses pick up the faint signatures of life. Some Imperial soldiers remain alive, pinned down behind the twisted hull of a chimera, their lasguns trembling in tired hands as they try to steady their breathing. Their morale is fraying. Their hope is evaporating. Their comms chatter tells the rest of the story. A Xenos warband remains active in the area. Orcs, a species Tatsuya has never encountered, but whose sheer physical signature and crude weaponry immediately mark them as a threat. The surviving guardsmen believe themselves moments away from annihilation. They have no idea a variable has just entered the theater, one none of their tactica manuals could prepare them, for Tatsuya does not approach them from the front. He simply appears beside their improvised cover, his movement measured, unthreatening, yet precise. The soldiers recoil, weapons rising instinctively. They do not recognize him as human at first. His uniform and bearing are alien to them, his aura too composed for any battlefield survivor, but what disarms them is not his appearance, it is the effect he exerts naturally, as if reality stays quieter around him. The squad sergeant, battered and exhausted, demands identification. Tatsuya gives none. Instead, he requests a brief tactical summary in a tone so calm it feels out of place amid the screams of distant orc engines and guttural battle cries. The men speak quickly. An orc nob leads a band of raiders, having broken the Imperial line 2 hours earlier. They outnumber the guardsmen 10-1, and the greenskins are advancing again. No reinforcements will arrive. No extraction is possible. They expect death. Tatsuya listens without expression. Inside his mind, calculations branch out like fractals scaling. Impact vectors, heat output, binding stability, every parameter needed to enact world-breaking magic. He has spent his life being a deterrent, a hidden weapon, a trump card disguised as a student. In this galaxy, restraint may prove irrelevant. The orcs appear on the ridge moments later, roaring as they fire their crude shooters, each round spraying wildly. The guardsmen flinch, fire back, and brace for the inevitable charge. But Tatsuya simply raises his hand. He does not speak an incantation. He does not gesture theatrically. He simply selects a phenomenon and erases it. The incoming bullets vanish midair. Particles undone, motion cancelled. The orcs surge forward, confused, but rage propels them. Their psychic pressure is crude, but tangible, a warped echo of the warp that Tatsuya cannot fully interpret, but magic is magic, whether refined or feral, and he is built to overwrite it. The first orc dies without pain or drama. His body collapses into particulate dust, a clean erasure of mass and identity. The next 4 fall the same way. The rest of the mob hesitates for the first time, their primitive brains struggling to comprehend an enemy who kills without visible weapons. Tatsuya steps forward, his expression unchanged. The guardsmen stare, too stunned to fire. The orc nob charges, bellowing, swinging a massive cleaver. Tatsuya nearly sighs. He compresses thermal energy, shapes it into a point, and releases it. The explosion is instantaneous. The nob evaporates, his armor glowing white for a fraction of a second before collapsing into molten slag. The shockwave ripples across the ridge, throwing lesser orcs backward. Within 20 seconds, the battlefield is silent again. The guardsmen stare at him like he is a living weapon, which is accurate, but their awe is mixed with fear. In the Imperium, power this precise and this effortless is rarely anything but heretical, yet they cannot deny that he saved them. Their sergeant attempts to thank him, but Tatsuya simply asks where the nearest command post is located. They point toward the distant mountains, where a beleaguered Imperial regiment continues to hold the line. That is enough. Tatsuya begins walking. Along the way, he analyzes everything he has witnessed. The orcs are biologically absurd, hyper-resilient, psychically loud, engineered for violence. Humanity in this galaxy is surprisingly fragile, yet structured under an empire so vast that the term monolithic feels insufficient. The warp intrigues him more than anything else. It is not magic as he understands it, but a psychic ocean, a shadow of consciousness magnified to cosmic scale. Dangerous, unstable, possibly sentient, and worshipped or feared by nearly all intelligent species he has scanned. To Tatsuya, it feels like a systemic flaw in the universe's operating principles. When he reaches the regiment's forward command post, alarms sound immediately. Imperial officers scramble, weapons primed. Psychers react violently to his presence, not because he is psychic, but because the absence of psychic signature in one so powerful feels like a hole in the warp. Tatsuya stands calm, hands visible, and offers assistance. The officers demand verification, then threaten detention, then excommunication. Their fear escalates rapidly, but before they can act, a towering figure enters the command tent. A space marine of the Ultramarines chapter. His armor marked with battle damage and purity seals his presence, commands silence. He studies Tatsuya with the cold scrutiny of a post-human warrior bred for war. The Marine senses neither warp corruption nor mortal frailty. Instead, he senses something disconcerting, a power that does not fit the universe's logic. He questions Tatsuya directly, demanding to know whether he is a Psyker, a Xenos, or something else. Tatsuya answers truthfully. He is human, but not of this galaxy, not of this timeline, not of their cosmology. The Marine does not believe him, but he cannot dismiss what he has witnessed through the battlefield reports coming in from the guardsmen. The Marine calls for an Inquisitor. And this is how Tatsuya Shiba, the most dangerous strategic asset of his home world, becomes a mystery within the Imperium of man, a variable no faction understands, a threat no doctrine covers, and a potential weapon no hierarchy will ignore. The galaxy does not yet realize it, but a new force has entered its eternal war, and he is already analyzing how to rewrite it. The inquisitorial vessel arrives within hours, descending through the smoky atmosphere with the weight of authority that only the Imperium's most feared organization can project. Its hull, covered in purity seals and Gothic iconography, casts a long shadow over the battered command post. Soldiers whisper prayers. Officers straighten their uniforms. Even the Ultramarine stands more rigid, as if preparing to receive a force of nature. For many, the Inquisition is the final arbiter of existence. For Tatsuya Shiba, it is simply an unknown variable requiring assessment. When the ramp lowers, two figures emerge. The first is a robed interrogator with the expression of a man who hasn't known rest in a decade. The second is the true power, Inquisitor Ilara Vaughn, her armor lacquered black and crimson, her eyes as sharp as a power blade. She scans the environment, immediately noticing Tatsuya. To her, he is the anomaly that brought her here. She steps toward him, her stride unhurried but unmistakably dominant. She requests a classification. Tatsuya gives the same answer he provided earlier. He is human, not a psyker, not a mutant, not a Xenos. His origin lies outside this universe. The Inquisitor regards him with the kind of scrutiny that could crack stone. She orders a series of tests. Tatsuya does not resist, not because he fears the Inquisition, but because resistance would escalate the situation unnecessarily. The tests do not make sense to the Imperials. He possesses no warp signature whatsoever, yet he manipulates energy and matter in ways that mirror psychic phenomena. He shows no genetic abnormalities, but his capabilities border on the impossible. His grasp of physics contradicts the Mechanicus's sacred laws. His composed demeanor under questioning unnerves even the Space Marine standing guard. To the psychers present, he feels like a blank spot in reality, not a pariah, but something more complex, an entity whose presence the warp cannot categorize. Inquisitor Vaughn becomes increasingly torn. Her mandate is clear. Any anomaly is a potential threat to humanity. And yet, the reports she has received from the battlefield make it impossible to categorize Tatsuya as merely a danger. He saved Imperial lives. He eradicated Xenos forces with surgical precision. He acted without malice or chaos. Still, the Imperium does not tolerate the unexplained lightly. Eventually, she dismisses the examiners and confronts him directly, dismissing the pretense of procedure. She wants to know what he truly is. Tatsuya answers in the only way he can. Truthfully. He explains his abilities: decomposition, material manipulation, thermal oscillation magic, all of it described through his world's magical framework. The Inquisitor listens, attempting to fit the pieces into her understanding of psychers and warp phenomena. They do not align. It is like trying to interpret a machine's spirit through the lens of sorcery. When he finishes, she asks one more question. Is he a threat to the Imperium? He pauses, not because he doubts the answer, but because the question itself is flawed. To Tatsuya, being a threat is a matter of intention, not capability. He could be a threat to any empire, any army, any world. But he has no interest in conquest or destruction unless forced. He states this plainly. The Inquisitor studies him for a long moment. She sees no deception, but the truth itself is unsettling. A being who can bend reality without the warp is either a blessing or a catastrophe waiting to occur. The Imperium has no structure for anything that does not neatly fall into tool or heresy. Before she makes her decision, a Vox operator rushes into the tent, panic in his voice. A new threat has appeared near the regimental lines. Not orcs, not Eldar, not any species they have engaged previously. A Tyranid vanguard organism. The news changes everything. A Tyranid organism means a hive fleet might be looming beyond the system, preparing to consume the planet. If true, the regiment, and possibly the entire sector, is in mortal danger. The Inquisitor makes a calculated gamble. She orders Tatsuya to accompany her to the front. His abilities, if real, may be the difference between survival and extinction. The Ultramarine steps forward as well, volunteering to escort them. Tatsuya says nothing. He simply follows. Their transport roars toward the front lines. The landscape grows more devastated the farther they travel. Entire forests have been reduced to skeletal remains, their biomass siphoned away. Craters ooze with organic residue that Tatsuya cannot fully categorize. The temperature fluctuates unnaturally. The air tinged with chemical traces he recognizes as metabolic byproducts of a species optimized for consumption. The Imperium fears Tyranids for good reason. To Tatsuya, they feel like a biological magic system, one designed for adaptation and unstoppable growth. Their evolutionary capabilities hold a kind of brutal elegance. But elegance or not, they are a threat, a swarm without reason, without mercy, a force that devours everything. When the transport reaches the defensive line, the situation is dire. Guardsmen fire desperately into the fog, their lasguns barely slowing the advance of chitinous creatures. Larger bioforms stalk the battlefield, their eyes glowing with predatory instinct. The Inquisitor's presence calms no one. She is simply another grim reminder of how desperate things have become. The moment Tatsuya steps out of the transport, the battlefield reacts. Tyranid organisms stop mid-climb, turning their heads in unnatural unison, as if sensing an anomaly. A shriek ripples through the swarm. The psychic pressure spikes, a hive mind node reacting to something it cannot categorize. Tatsuya feels it too. The Tyranid collective intelligence is unlike anything from his world. It is not a psychic being in the traditional sense. It is an emergent, continent-spanning consciousness. The warp echoes of it are immense. But the core logic of the species is simple. Identify, consume, evolve. And it has just identified him. A massive Tyranid warrior charges, its bone swords glistening. Lasfire ricochets off its carapace. The ultramarine steps forward, drawing his power sword, ready to intercept. But Tatsuya simply raises a hand. The warrior stops mid-stride. Not physically, its muscles still strain, but the very concept of momentum has been stripped from it. Its kinetic energy dissipates like mist. Then Tatsuya performs a phenomenon decomposition on the bioform's exoskeleton. The creature disintegrates in a clean, silent burst of particulate ash. The entire line of Tyranids recoils. What follows is not a battle, it is dissection. Tatsuya moves with calm precision, deleting organisms, freezing metabolic pathways, halting chemical reactions, unraveling biological constructs with surgical ease. The ultramarine stands in awe. The Inquisitor watches with a mixture of relief and dread. The guardsmen stop firing entirely, unable to reconcile what they are witnessing. Within minutes, the vanguard organism collapses. The hive mind withdraws its psychic attention, confused and unable to adapt to a threat it cannot measure. The battlefield falls silent, save for the distant hum of defense batteries. Tatsuya lowers his hand. Inquisitor Vaughn looks at him, knowing the truth now. He is not a weapon the Imperium can control. He is a weapon that can decide the fate of anything he chooses, and the galaxy has just begun to notice him. The aftermath of the Tyranid engagement spreads through the regiment like a quiet shockwave. Officers scramble to update their logs, guardsmen whisper among themselves, and the ultramarine files a terse report that almost seems confused by its own content. The Inquisitor, meanwhile, remains silent. She walks beside Tatsuya as the defensive lines reset. Observing him with the focus of someone realizing that the tool she's discovered may be too sharp to hold safely, Tatsuya is already analyzing the battlefield. The decomposed Tyranid remains. Leave behind no biomass, no traceable residue beyond harmless particulate matter. To the Imperium, this is unnatural. To Tatsuya, it is simply the expected result of erasing a phenomenon at the structural level. Yet he notes something else. The hive mind had reacted to him. For a moment, its psychic field tried to probe him, assess him, categorize him. It failed, and failure, for a species built on relentless adaptation, is dangerous. The ultramarine approaches, his armor still stained with ichor. He asks a question that few Astartes ever need to ask. What exactly is Tatsuya's purpose? The Marine is not demanding obedience, nor declaring judgment. He is seeking comprehension, something he realizes the Imperium's doctrines cannot provide. Tatsuya responds that his purpose is situational. He protects what he chooses to protect. He destroys what must be destroyed. He does not serve an empire. The Marine absorbs this answer in stoic silence. For a warrior genetically forged for loyalty, the concept of voluntary alignment is almost alien. Inquisitor Vaughn finally breaks her silence. She orders Tatsuya to accompany her to the command bunker. The situation has escalated beyond local significance. A single Tyranid vanguard organism could be coincidence, but the strategic implications of Hive Fleet presence are catastrophic. She needs to understand whether the planet can be saved, or whether exterminatus must be considered. And she needs to understand where Tatsuya fits into that equation. The bunker is dimly lit, its walls crowded with cogitators and hololithic projectors. Tech priests chant Binharic prayers as they sift through battlefield data. When Tatsuya enters, every machine spirit seems to recoil, flickering in patterns the priests interpret as agitation. He notices this, but says nothing. Vaughn stands before a flickering tactical display showing biosignatures blooming across the planet's northern continent. Small now, but multiplying, the Tyranids are probing, testing the world's defenses. She turns to Tatsuya and asks what he perceives. His answer is unsettling. The Tyranids are not merely advancing, they are analyzing the new variable he introduced. The hive mind's attention has partially returned, not through psychic probing, but through behavioral shifts in the swarm. It is adjusting tactics, searching for a countermeasure. Learning. The Inquisitor asks if they can adapt to him. Tatsuya considers this carefully. In his world, magical interference operates within stable rules. In the 41st millennium, the warp breaks rules simply by existing. The Tyranids evolve in response to threats through biological, psychic, and energetic pathways. If the hive mind perceives his abilities as patterns instead of impossibilities, it could theoretically adapt. But the cost would be enormous. The swarm might need to tear apart thousands of organisms, reshape entire bioforms, redirect synaptic flows. Yet it might try. His conclusion is simple. The Tyranids will attempt to adapt, but their efforts may be insufficient. His abilities operate outside their evolutionary logic. Still, he cautions that relying entirely on his presence would be strategically reckless. The Inquisitor absorbs this with an expression suggesting she rarely hears statements urging less reliance on overwhelming power. Before she can ask more, a Magos biologist enters, his mechadendrites twitching. He demands to perform mechanistic analysis on Tatsuya's abilities. Vaughn denies the request instantly. She knows the Adeptus Mechanicus would dissect Tatsuya in the name of progress, and she knows such an attempt would end fatally for them. The Magos sputters, accusing her of sabotaging the Omnissiah's will. Tatsuya simply watches, silently cataloguing the Mechanicus's behavior patterns. When the Magos finally leaves in a storm of binary outrage, Vaughn exhales softly and tells him the truth. Every faction in the Imperium will want to claim him. The Mechanicus will want to reduce him to data. The Ecclesiarchy will want to declare him a miracle or a heresy. The Astra Militarum will want him deployed. The Astartes will want him evaluated. and the Inquisition will be forced to decide whether he is a threat. Tatsuya replies that these outcomes are predictable. If necessary, he can remove himself from the equation. The statement is not a threat. It is a logistical note. The Inquisitor finds no comfort in it. Their discussion is interrupted by alarms. A new biosignature has appeared, much larger, far heavier, and unmistakably synapse-linked. A Tyrannid Prime. The creature leads a larger brood, advancing with coordinated precision. The hive mind is escalating. The outer defense lines prepare. Heavy bolters warm. Lehman rust tanks roll into position. But the scale of the incoming brood is far beyond what the regimental survivors can withstand. Vaughn orders immediate withdrawal to secondary defensive positions. Tatsuya does not move. He states that retreat is unnecessary. The Ultramarine steps beside him, uncertain whether to support or restrain him. The Inquisitor orders him to fall back, warning that the Tyrannids are adapting. Tatsuya simply replies that he wants to observe the adaptation firsthand. There is no arrogance in his tone, only analytical curiosity. The first wave appears through the smoke. Gaunts, but faster than before, moving with erratic bursts. Their movements attempting to disrupt predictive targeting. Tatsuya notes the shift. Micro-adaptation. Rapid behavioral recalibration. The hive mind testing interference patterns. He erases them effortlessly. The second wave emerges. Warriors with reinforced carapace layers and partially shielded neural clusters. Tatsuya decomposes their structural reinforcement. They fall instantly. Then the Prime arrives. It is enormous, its exoskeleton layered with bioinsulation, its synaptic presence pulsating, its bone sword crackles with psychic resonance, an adaptation designed to interface with the warp. The hive mind is attempting to counter an ability it does not truly understand by brute-forcing metaphysical pressure. Tatsuya pauses, studying it. The Prime lunges. He activates Gram Demolition, erasing not the creature's body, but the phenomenon enabling its psychic channel. The Prime collapses, its neural field detonating into harmless static. The hive mind recoils again, this time violently. The swarm retreats. The Imperium watches, awed and horrified. Inquisitor Vaughn realizes then that Tatsuya is not simply powerful. He is a proof of concept the universe never intended. And now, every psychic presence within the sector has felt him. That includes forces far worse than the Tyrannids. Chaos has noticed. Across the ruined landscape, the echoes of the Tyrannid retreat fade into tense silence. What remains is an army too exhausted to celebrate, an Inquisitor too conflicted to find relief, and a lone young man whose expression has not shifted since the day began. Tatsuya Shiba inhabits a calm that feels unnatural in the 41st millennium, a galaxy where serenity is nearly extinct. But beneath the quiet, something has shifted. Not in him, he is constant, but in the fabric of the warp itself. The first indication comes subtly. Psychers across the regiment drop to their knees. Some scream. Others convulse. The air thickens, heavy with unseen pressure. Even the Ultramarine stiffens, his transhuman senses detecting a tremor not of sound, but of presence. The Inquisitor reacts immediately, drawing her bolt pistol and scanning the horizon. She knows this phenomenon well. It is not Tyrannids. It is not Xenos at all. It is the warp paying attention. Tatsuya observes the psychers with clinical curiosity. This reaction, unlike the Tyrannid hive mind, is not a localized phenomenon. It is diffuse, pervasive, inconsistent. He senses no direct force acting on him, but he does detect agitation. Like a destabilized field, struggling to reinterpret something outside its parameters. The warp does not understand him, but it recognizes that it should understand. That, in this galaxy, is enough to provoke chaos. The nearest psyker regains his senses, long enough to speak a word that chills the entire bunker. Demonic resonance. Not summoning, but recognition. Something in the Imperium has brushed against the material realm, seeking identification. It did not find one. The Inquisitor orders an immediate lockdown. Vox channels explode with activity. Astropaths struggle to maintain coherent signals, their minds clouded by interference. Reports begin filtering in from distant outposts, psychic disturbances, spontaneous manifestations, whispering voices, and always the same pattern: interest, confusion, probing. For the first time, Tatsuya asks a question. What is the warp? The room freezes. Explaining the warp is like explaining madness to someone who has never felt fear. Vaughn attempts the simplest answer. The warp is an alternate dimension of raw emotion, psychic energy, and turbulent consciousness. A realm where thoughts become storms, where demons form from the collective minds of sentient species. It is the source of psychic power, sorcery, and corruption, and it is always watching. Tatsuya listens carefully. In his world, magic operates through systematic structural manipulation. The warp, however, is a metaphysical ocean, shaped by emotion. To him, it resembles an unstable, computational matrix, too chaotic to maintain integrity, yet influential enough to dominate civilizations. The idea that demons are shaped by belief and fear would be absurd if the battlefield were not already saturated with impossible phenomena. The Ultramarine elaborates further, explaining in his stoic cadence how chaos corrupts, tempts, and destroys. He describes the ruinous powers: Khorne, the embodiment of rage and bloodshed; Tzeentch, the master of sorcery and change; Nurgle, the father of decay; and Slaanesh, the prince of excess. As each name is spoken, the psychers flinch at faint echoes of their presence. Tatsuya hears nothing, feels nothing, sees nothing. To the warp, he is not merely unreadable, he is invisible. This realization spreads across the bunker like cold fire. The Inquisitor stares at him as if reassessing every conclusion she has formed so far. A being capable of reality manipulation, who sits outside warp influence, is not simply rare, it is unprecedented. Even the Necrons who operate beyond the warp do not bend phenomena with such surgical ease. Even the Citan do not erase things so cleanly. Before Vaughn can question him further, a new alert sounds, this time from orbital sensors. A spatial anomaly has formed near the planet's upper atmosphere. A warp rift, small but growing. Demonic incursion. The temperature drops, the lights flicker. Screams echo from distant corridors as psychers recoil again. The Ultramarine draws his weapon. The Inquisitor issues her orders. Evacuate non-essential personnel, reinforce the sanctified perimeter, and prepare for containment. She looks at Tatsuya, not with fear, but with expectation. She asks him if he can confront whatever is emerging. Tatsuya does not answer immediately. He studies the warp rift forming on the hololithic display. It is unlike anything from his universe, an aperture of raw, emotional turbulence, its boundary unstable, its internal structure indefinable. He needs to observe it directly. Outside, the sky tears open. Reality fractures like glass, forming a glowing wound of impossible geometry. The air tastes of metal and blood. The ground trembles as demonic figures push through the breach, wraith-like forms of shifting color and malice. They are lesser demons, their shapes inconsistent, their outlines flickering between states. They screech not with mouths, but with the sound of collapsing psychic constructs Tatsuya stands at the epicenter of their focus. They can sense life all around, the guardsmen, the psychers, even the ultramarine. But Tatsuya is a void, a null point, an absence so profound that the demons hesitate, confused. Their forms distort, trying to resolve him into a category, psyker, mortal, soulless, machine. Nothing fits. The first demon lunges. Tatsuya lifts a hand, not in fear, but in experimental interest. He performs a phenomenon decomposition, not on its body, but on the metaphysical structure, tethering it to the material realm. The demon screams as its warp anchor dissolves. Its form collapses into dust-like fragments of psychic noise. The others recoil instantly. Chaos has encountered many foes, never one that simply deletes its presence. The rift shudders violently, reacting to the sudden erasure. More demons spill out, these larger, more defined, their forms coalescing around intense emotional cores. The ultramarine charges into them with disciplined fury. Bolter fire tears limbs from nightmares. Psychic shielding flickers as the Inquisitor unleashes sanctified rounds and wards, but the center of the battlefield remains eerily calm. Tatsuya walks forward, unhurried. He identifies the rift's instability. A chaos aperture relies on sustained psychic pressure. Remove that, and the doorway cannot hold. He activates Gram demolition at a conceptual level, not on matter, but on the phenomenon of the portal's continuity. The rift spasms. Demons scream as their foothold collapses. The sky knits itself shut. Silence descends. Then the psychers collapse again. But this time, the pain is different. It is not chaos leaking through. It is withdrawal, the psychic dissonance of the warp recoiling violently. The demonic presence vanishes completely. The ultramarine looks at Tatsuya with something approaching reverence. The Inquisitor looks at him with something approaching fear. Tatsuya simply notes that the warp is structurally unstable and recommends the Imperium develop a more systematic approach to managing interdimensional phenomena. The Inquisitor nearly laughs at the absurd understatement. But deeper within the warp, something stirs. Something old, something powerful, something intelligent. Tatsuya Shiba has entered the galaxy, and a chaos god has taken interest far beyond mortal perception. In the roiling expanse of the Imperium, a disturbance ripples like a stone cast into an ocean of madness. Warp tides shift. Demonic predators pause mid-hunt. Countless lesser entities scatter instinctively, their forms dissipating into colored wisps. Even the great storms that swirl endlessly around the domains of the ruinous powers flicker as if inhaling sharply. A presence unlike anything the warp has ever encountered has just erased a portion of it. Not banished, not purified, deleted. And deletion is an insult chaos has never tolerated. Deep within a region shaped by shimmering contradictions and infinite truths, a voice forms, ancient, amused, and infinitely curious. It is the laughter of shifting possibility, the whisper of 1,000 futures collapsing into one. Tsinch, the changer of ways, has taken notice. He examines the imprint left behind by Tatsuya Shiba's intervention. It is small, barely a scratch, yet perfectly clean. No corruption, no residue, no emotion, no psychic echo. A perfect nullification. To Tsinch, who embodies sorcery, mutation, and change, the idea of something that exists outside the tapestry of destiny is intoxicating, not a pariah, not a machine, not a psyker. Something new, something that breaks patterns instead of bending to them. Something that must be understood, and if possible, bent a new ripple, sweeps the warp, reaching the mortal realm like a cold breath. On the battlefield below, as guardsmen regroup and chaplains consecrate the scorched ground, Tatsuya simply stands, observing the aftermath of his own intervention. The ultramarine reports to the Inquisitor, his tone steady despite the enormity of what has occurred. They eliminated a demonic incursion with minimal casualties, a feat that, under any other circumstances, would demand immediate celebration. These are not normal circumstances. Inquisitor Vaughn moves to Tatsuya's side. She studies him carefully, attempting once again to categorize him. A being capable of deleting demons without psychic power challenges everything she's been taught. The ecclesiarchy would call him a miracle. The Mechanicus would call him a violation. The Inquisition must decide whether he is hope or heresy. Before she can speak, she receives a priority transmission from orbit. Imperial Navy vessels have detected a new warp anomaly, larger, more stable, and distinctly hostile. It is growing at a rate that cannot be coincidence. The rift was not the end. It was the invitation. Tatsuya asks to see the data. Vaughn hesitates, but hands him a portable hololith. His eyes scan the numbers, watching the energy signature expand like a blooming singularity. He notes harmonic fluctuations. Unlike the earlier breach, this is not a random demonic manifestation. This is a deliberate act. Someone or something has targeted this location. The ultramarine steps forward. His voice, though controlled, carries an edge of concern, rare for an Astartes. He believes the enemy has identified Tatsuya as a threat and is escalating accordingly. Tatsuya does not disagree. He senses nothing directly, but recognizes the logic. A system encountering an anomaly generates countermeasures. The warp is behaving like a hostile intelligence, and it is escalating. Vaughn orders immediate evacuation of all non-combat personnel from the area. She then requests orbital fire support, but the Navy denies the request. The anomaly's energy signature mimics friendly transponder codes at irregular intervals, confusing targeting systems. The Inquisitor suspects manipulation. Tatsuya runs a quick calculation and confirms it. Something is spoofing the data. A psyker nearby screams and collapses, blood streaming from his nose. He gasps out a warning before losing consciousness. A presence is descending. The temperature drops. Shadows stretch unnaturally. The air vibrates with ethereal resonance. The soldiers tense, readying their weapons. The ultramarine raises his power sword. Vaughn steadies her pistol, but her expression reveals she knows conventional weapons may soon be meaningless. A tear forms in the sky, wider and more controlled than before. This is not the chaotic rupture of lesser demons. This is a gate, and from it steps a creature shaped from impossible geometry and shimmering iridescence. Its form is humanoid, but constantly shifting, wings folding and unfolding, limbs elongating, eyes appearing and vanishing. Its very existence seems to bend light, color, and sanity, a lord of change, a greater demon of Tzinch. Chaos does not send such beings casually. The creature surveys the battlefield with an intelligence that burns. Its voice echoes directly into every mind within range, layered and paradoxical. A curiosity wanders the mortal realm. Guardsmen drop their weapons, clutching their temples. The ultramarine braces himself, gritting his teeth. The psychers scream in unison. Even Vaughn staggers. Tatsuya alone remains unaffected, though he notes the psychic interference patterns with analytical interest. The demon's countless eyes focus on him. You do not belong to fate. You do not dream. You do not fear. What then are you? Tatsuya does not answer. He simply observes. The demon laughs, a sound like fracturing glass. Shall we see what lies beneath your stillness? It raises a talon, Reality warps around it. Probability collapses into weaponized form. A torrent of raw warp energy surges toward Tatsuya, tearing through the ground like liquid lightning. Tatsuya lifts his hand. He applies decomposition, not to the energy itself, but to the underlying phenomenon that links the attack to physical reality. The surge evaporates into harmless air. The demon pauses, shocked. This has never happened. It spreads its wings and unleashes a storm of transmutative sorcery, mutating the very air, turning stone into liquid, liquid into flame, flame into crystalline vines. The world twists under its will. Tatsuya responds in kind. With gram demolition, he erases the concept of alteration in a widening radius. The battlefield stabilizes instantly. Now the Lord of Change grows excited. You undo change itself. Fascinating. It shifts tactics. Its form fractures into multiple overlapping timelines, alternate versions attacking simultaneously, attempting to overwhelm Tatsuya with contradictions. Tatsuya moves once. A single gesture. He decomposes the multi-temporal overlay, deleting the phenomenon of divergence. All iterations collapse into one. The demon reels. For the first time, it feels the predator's fear. Tatsuya steps forward. He asks a question, calm and precise. What is your objective? The demon responds with reluctant honesty. Its master seeks knowledge, understanding, possibility. Tatsuya's existence threatens the structure of fate itself. Tsinch wants to know him. Tatsuya nods once, as if completing a calculation. He lifts his hand again. The demon screams as he targets not its body, but the metaphysical thread anchoring it to the changer of ways. Its connection to its god flickers. The warp shudders. Inquisitor Vaughn watches, horrified, because she understands the implication. Tatsuya Shiba is severing a greater demon's link to a chaos god, and if he succeeds, the entire galaxy will feel it. Tatsuya stood on the irradiated ridge for several seconds, analyzing the movement patterns of the advancing Eldar host. Though the Imperium had long struggled to fully understand the fluid, unpredictable logic of Eldari warfare, he passed the motions with a near-mathematical certainty. Their advance was elegant, deliberately staggered to confuse conventional targeting systems. Their psychic signatures, normally a chaotic mesh of emotion and intent, were to him a layered data stream waiting to be deciphered. The Eldar had noticed him by now, even among the countless horrors and anomalies of the 41st Millennium. A lone human, calmly observing a warp-sensitive battle formation, stood out. But Tatsuya was not simply observing. He was measuring. He was calibrating. He was preparing. The first volley of shuriken fire scythed toward him in a glittering arc, each monomolecular disk vibrating with lethal kinetic force. For most humans, even enhanced super soldiers, reaction time would be insufficient. Tatsuya simply reshaped the outcome. Activation codes triggered within his psionically shielded core. The world folded. The air rippled. The shuriken rounds that should have torn through him instead disassembled mid-flight, their molecular cohesion undone in a moment of cold precision. Eldar pathfinders hesitated, startled by a phenomenon that defied their considerable experience. Tatsuya tilted his head slightly. Now that baseline data was confirmed, he could proceed. Without changing posture, he released a single, nearly invisible pulse of information-severing energy. It expanded in a perfectly controlled hemisphere, soft, silent, and almost gentle to the naked eye. To the Eldar, it was catastrophic. The foremost rank collapsed instantly, their bodies losing structural integrity as atomic bonds unraveled, but he had not killed all of them. Not yet. The Eldari were a species defined by tragedy and foresight. Eliminating an entire detachment would create unnecessary ripples within their larger threat assessments. He needed them alive long enough to deliver a message. Before the surviving Eldar could regroup, a new presence entered the field. Tatsuya sensed it before he saw it, an immense pressure in the warp like a burning spearhead. The ground swelled, the dust stirred. A towering figure emerged from the scorched haze, a Farseer, armored in wraithbone and surrounded by a halo of psychic distortion. Their mind radiated caution, sorrow, and sharp analytical curiosity. The two regarded each other without speaking, though far more communication occurred in silence than words could express. The Farseer reached out through the warp, attempting a standard psychic reading. Tatsuya allowed the attempt, but only partially. What the Farseer sensed was beyond comprehension. A mind layered like quantum circuitry, emotion muted to near zero, and an unnatural compatibility with structured superpower systems that should not exist in the grimdark universe. The sudden recoil of shock nearly cracked the wraithbone mask. When the Farseer spoke, their voice trembled. "You do not belong to this time, nor to this galaxy, yet you stand here as if it were yours to claim." Tatsuya's reply was delivered with absolute calm. "Belonging is a matter of function, and I have determined that my function intersects with your war." The Eldar psychic field flared. "Human, you interfere in forces you cannot comprehend. Your existence distorts the skein of fate. Already, alternate futures collapse and reform around you." "Destiny is a pattern," Tatsuya answered. "Patterns can be rewritten." Before the Farseer could retaliate, a thunderous roar filled the air, a high-pitched scream of something massive approaching at speed. Moments later, a drop pod slammed into the battlefield, carving a crater of molten earth. The doors exploded outward, and a squad of Adeptus Astartes stormed out, bolters raised. Their armor bore the markings of the Ultramarines' Third Company, and at their forefront stood Captain Uriel Ventris, his helm's autosensors locked onto both Tatsuya and the Eldar forces with swift tactical evaluation. The captain's voice boomed through his vocal amplifier. "Identify yourself. You are not registered within Imperial battle doctrine. State allegiance immediately." Tatsuya turned slightly toward the Astartes, offering neither threat nor submission. "My allegiance is to maintaining balance. At present, that balance requires preventing excessive casualties on both sides." The Ultramarines tightened formation. The Farseer's psychic aura spiked again. Everyone expected conflict, but Tatsuya raised his hand with minimal force, and for a moment, the battlefield quieted, not by command, but by inevitability. He had analyzed too many variables to allow the situation to devolve into unnecessary violence. The Farseer, regaining composure, attempted another angle. "If you seek balance, then you must leave this world. The human Imperium will twist you into a weapon. They will exploit you until your existence contributes only to the cycle of ruin." Tatsuya studied the psychic fluctuations behind their words. Their fear was genuine, not for themselves, but for the galaxy. Another unknown super-entity entering the Imperium could trigger catastrophic shifts in the long war against the forces of chaos. The Eldar had lived through enough dooms to recognize the signs of another. Before he responded, a sudden surge in warp activity interrupted the moment. Tatsuya's sensors registered it instantly. Something was tearing through reality a few kilometers away, something ancient, predatory, and drenched in psychic corruption. The Farseer staggered. Uriel Ventris snapped his rifle upward. Even the Astartes felt the disturbance. The fabric of space convulsed, distorting into a blood-red fissure. From within, a demon stepped forth, towering, horned, and wreathed in fire, a bloodthirster of Khorne. Its roar shook the mountains, the power of raw hatred slammed across the battlefield like a burning wind. Even the Astartes braced themselves. The Eldar faltered. The daemon locked eyes on Tatsuya Shiba and recognized something fundamentally wrong with his existence. He was a thing without fear. The bloodthirster charged. Tatsuya's internal core surged with power as he activated a higher-tier decomposition protocol. His hands rose slowly, palms outward. The world fell into mathematical clarity. Sound vanished. Motion divided into measurable quanta. To him, the charging demon might as well have been moving through syrup. He released the spell. The bloodthirster's body shattered, not exploded, not burned, but disassembled into constituent particles that drifted like red dust on the wind, its roar cut off mid-sound, never reaching completion. The warp rift behind it recoiled violently before sealing shut. Silence returned. The Ultramarines stared. The Farseer trembled. Tatsuya understood that he had just crossed a threshold. By eliminating a greater demon with effortless precision, he had signaled to every faction present, and to the warp itself, that he was not a variable to be ignored. The galaxy would adapt. The powers of chaos would take notice. The Inquisition would react with predictably aggressive scrutiny. And the Eldar, with all their knowledge of futures, would re-examine their prophecies with newfound dread. Tatsuya spoke quietly into the stunned stillness. "This war is inefficient. I will correct that." The Farseer whispered, horrified. "You cannot correct the 41st millennium. It is built on tragedy." Then the structure must be redefined. As the dust settled, Tatsuya realized the next phase of his analysis would require deeper understanding, not just of imperial warfare or alien strategy, but of the warp itself. And for that, he would need to confront entities far more elusive than demons or Xenos warriors. He would need to begin with the Emperor. In the hours following the Bloodthirster's annihilation, the battlefield remained eerily silent. Neither the Ultramarines nor the remaining Eldar attempted withdrawal. All eyes fixed on Tatsuya Shiba, each faction attempting to measure the full scale of the anomaly now walking their galaxy. For Tatsuya, the standstill was merely a pause to gather fresh data. He sensed expanding ripples across the Imperium, waves created not only by the demon's destruction, but by his own presence intruding upon the logic of the warp. The 41st millennium was reacting to him, and he needed to understand how deeply that reaction ran. The Ultramarines were the first to break formation. Captain Uriel Ventress stepped forward, lowering his bolter slightly. The motion was not one of trust, but of procedure. "Your display of power will compel high-level scrutiny," Ventress said, voice firm through the Vox grill. "The Inquisition will demand you answer for your abilities. If you are truly aligned with humanity's survival, you must come with us." Tatsuya observed Ventress's internal state with calm dispassion. The captain's loyalty was unwavering, but there were layers of concern beneath his disciplined exterior. It was not fear of Tatsuya, but fear of the consequences that would follow. Tatsuya considered the variables. Going with the Ultramarines would accelerate inevitable confrontation with the Imperial hierarchy. Declining would elevate perceived threat level and provoke a more militarized response. Both paths were predictable, but one path led more efficiently to the information he required. "Very well," Tatsuya said. "I will accompany you." Ventress nodded once, as if bracing himself for the weight of what came next. But before the Ultramarines could regroup, the Farseer stepped forward wraithbone armor gleaming with psychic tension. "Human," the Farseer warned, "if you allow the Imperium to take you, you will be imprisoned, dissected, or weaponized. Your nature threatens them, and threat is something the Imperium does not tolerate." Tatsuya turned his gaze toward the Eldar psychic. "You perceive futures," he said evenly. "Then you understand the probability curve." "Too well," the Farseer answered, "and that is why we must intervene." The air vibrated as the Eldar's psychic aura grew, not in aggression, but urgency. "Let us take you to a craft world. There are paths we can show you, paths the Imperium cannot. The warp has already begun reshaping itself around you. If left unchecked, your existence may tear certain fates apart." "I am already aware," Tatsuya replied, "which is why I must see the Emperor." The Farseer staggered as though struck. Even the Ultramarines reacted, tense and disbelieving. Ventress spoke first. "No living being may approach the Golden Throne, not even we." The statement was not an order, but a hard truth. The Emperor's presence is beyond comprehension. "Comprehension is a matter of analysis," Tatsuya said, "and analysis is my function." Before further argument could unfold, the war-torn sky above them darkened. A fleet translated into real space, its gravity wake distorting the upper atmosphere. Massive silhouettes burned through the cloud layer. The Ultramarines recognized the markings instantly: black, red, and gold, the symbols of the Inquisition. A gunship descended, trailing flame and smoke. Its ramp opened before it landed, and several black-robed figures stepped out, flanked by stormtroopers in carapace armor. At their center strode a woman in engraved power armor, her rosette gleaming with unmistakable authority: Inquisitor Katarina Ral. Her voice, amplified by a vox sigil, was severe enough to cut through the battlefield like a blade. "By order of the Holy Ordos, the anomalous individual designated entity Theta Shiba will surrender for immediate evaluation." Tatsuya scanned her aura iron discipline. Zeal matched with intellect. She was dangerous not because of power, but because of strategic clarity. He understood instantly that the Inquisition would view him not as an asset, but as a catastrophic breach of natural order. Negotiation would be inefficient, but confrontation would waste time. "I will go with you," Tatsuya said simply. Even the Inquisitor seemed momentarily surprised. "Wise," she replied. "You may yet serve the Emperor's design." The Farseer stepped forward, anguish tightening their features. "Human, you do not understand the depth of what awaits you." "Yes," Tatsuya said, "I do." What followed was a rapid extraction. The Inquisition secured the area with ruthless efficiency. The Eldari retreated under the Farseer's guidance, though their psychic distress lingered. The Ultramarines escorted Tatsuya into the gunship, with the unspoken understanding that they were now witnesses to an event that could alter the Imperium's future. The gunship rose into the sky. Through reinforced plasteel windows, Tatsuya surveyed the battlefield disappearing beneath them. Not a single motion was wasted. His focus was already shifting from immediate threats to larger patterns. He needed to examine the Emperor's psychic signature, analyze how his own presence interacted with the warp, and determine what structural weaknesses could be stabilized or exploited. Upon entering orbit, Tatsuya sensed something unexpected: a pulse, a beacon, a psychic flare brighter and more complex than any he had encountered thus far. It wasn't directed at him, but it was aware of him. It observed him the way a god might observe a new equation rewriting itself. The Emperor had noticed the Inquisition vessel made course for Terra with absolute priority. During the journey, Tatsuya remained confined within a reinforced containment chamber. Inquisitor Ral questioned him relentlessly. She probed his origins, his abilities, his limitations. Tatsuya answered precisely, withholding only what was necessary to prevent misinterpretation. Information shared was data. Data created patterns. Patterns shaped decisions. And the Imperium's decisions needed to be predictable. But the more she learned, the more disturbed Ral became. "Your existence violates known psychic law," she said during one interrogation. "You demonstrate impossible control over matter and information. You defy warp contamination. You are emotionless, yet stable. This is not human." "I am human," Tatsuya corrected, "simply optimized." Ral studied him for a long moment. "If what you claim is true, then your abilities could either save the Imperium or doom it beyond recovery. That determination depends on your leadership." Ral exhaled slowly. She understood the implication. When Terra finally came into view, a wounded jewel encased in orbital fortresses, Tatsuya sensed the psychic field thickening billions of minds, thousands of psychers, choirs, astropaths, the bones of a dying god radiating throughout the ether. The deeper their vessel descended into the atmosphere, the more intensely he felt it. Then the golden throne touched his awareness. It was like standing in the presence of a star, infinite light, chained by infinite agony, a being whose every heartbeat was a battlefield against entropy, chaos, and decaying divinity. The Emperor's psychic pressure pressed in on Tatsuya like gravity. But instead of recoiling, he observed, he measured, he analyzed. And for the briefest moment, he believed the Emperor saw him in return, not as a human, not as a psyker, but as an anomaly capable of rewriting the parameters of existence. Inquisitor Ral watched Tatsuya's expression change the slightest fraction. "You feel it, don't you?" "Yes," Tatsuya said. "This world rests on the failing machinery of a dying god." Ral stiffened. "Mind your words." Tatsuya ignored the warning. "If the Emperor falls, the Imperium collapses, and the galaxy enters total ruin. Which is why we endure," Ral snapped. "Which is why we fight." "Or," Tatsuya said quietly, "which is why we correct the structure itself." Ral stared at him, cold dread filling her eyes. She realized then what he intended. Not destruction, not rebellion, something far more dangerous. Intervention. The innermost sanctum of the Imperial Palace was unlike any structure Tatsuya had encountered. Its walls were alive with psychic resonance, built not merely from stone and adamantium, but from centuries of ritual reinforcement and the collective prayers of a dying empire. Every corridor carried echoes of the Emperor's will, imprinting loyalty and purpose into all who passed through. For Tatsuya, these impressions were data, fragments of a colossal system operating under catastrophic strain. As Inquisitor Katarina Ral escorted him deeper into the labyrinth, he observed the rhythmic pattern of the Golden Throne's psychic pulses. They resembled the uneven heartbeat of a failing machine, desperately overclocking itself to maintain function. The closer they came to the throne, the heavier the warp currents grew. Human minds would have collapsed. Even Astartes would struggle to maintain coherence. Yet Tatsuya walked through it effortlessly. The streams of raw warp energy flowed around him and broke against the crystalline structure of his psionic core, finding no purchase. Ral noticed. For the first time since their journey began, she hesitated. "Remember," she said quietly, "no one, not even the High Lords, addresses the Emperor directly. His perception is beyond human experience." "I understand," Tatsuya replied. "That is why I am here." Raoul wanted to challenge the statement, but there was no time. The final gate opened, and a wave of blinding radiance washed over them. The chamber of the Golden Throne stretched out like a cathedral built to house a star. Gigantic pillars, carved with imperial iconography, rose into the haze. Thousands of cables, conduits, and arcane devices fed into the monumental throne itself, a fusion of lost technology and sorcerous engineering, and upon it sat the Emperor of mankind. His body was a burned-out husk of golden armor and desiccated flesh, yet the psychic presence radiating from him was beyond anything Tatsuya had measured before 1,000 psychers chanted around the chamber, stabilizing the Emperor's existence with their own lives. As one psychic choir burned out, another was ushered in to replace them. The process was horrifying, ritualistic, and brutally efficient. Tatsuya stepped forward. Instantly, the Emperor's psychic field crashed down on him like a collapsing supernova. For any mortal, it would have meant instant obliteration. But Tatsuya met the pressure with calm precision, allowing the psychic force to flow into the information analysis core at the center of his being. The throne's presence was immense, but it was structured. Even dying, the Emperor's mind was a latticework of commands, memories, and projections layered across millennia. The Emperor spoke. Not with words, not through sound, through structure. Tatsuya felt it as an algorithmic pattern transmitted directly into his consciousness. A message encoded in raw psychic architecture. A question formed from divine clarity and brutal desperation. "What are you?" Tatsuya answered in the only way meaningful. He opened a portion of his mind, carefully, deliberately, and allowed the Emperor to view the nature of his existence. The crystalline psionic core. The ability to deconstruct matter. The absence of fear. The suppressed emotions. The capabilities that defied warp logic. The Emperor analyzed the data at impossible speed. Tatsuya felt the conclusion crash back toward him. You should not exist in this universe. The psychic air around them howled. Servitors seized, psychers screamed, machinery sparked. Tatsuya stood firm. Existence is not bound by probability, he said aloud. It is shaped by cause and effect. I intend to correct the failing structure of this galaxy. The Emperor's response hit like a thunderstorm. You cannot correct it. The 41st millennium is built upon sacrifice and suffering. Its survival requires horrors you cannot comprehend. Its balance is fragile. Its future is doomed, but necessary. Doom is a prediction, Tatsuya replied. Predictions can be overwritten. Raoul's eyes widened behind him. She didn't understand the psychic exchange, but she felt the shift in the chamber. The Emperor's field pulsed violently, destabilizing the machinery. Tech priests scrambled to reinforce containment sigils. The psychic choirs began to falter. Something immense was unfolding, a collision between two incompatible paradigms. Tatsuya extended his senses into the Emperor's psychic field, mapping its structure. He saw the Astronomicon burning like a spear of light across the cosmos. He saw the interconnected threads of astropathic communication. He saw the Emperor's infinite struggle against the Chaos Gods, an impossible war fought through sheer willpower. And he saw the flaws, micro-fractures in the psychic scaffolding, eroded by 10,000 years of decay. If this continues, Tatsuya said, your empire will collapse within centuries. The warp will consume what remains. Humanity will be extinguished. Raoul shouted, You dare! The Emperor silenced her with a psychic pulse. Another message cut through Tatsuya's mind. What would you have me do? Allow me to intervene, Tatsuya said. Your power is immense, but your structure is failing. I can reinforce it, stabilize the throne, reduce warp leakage, increase your ability to project will. The entire chamber froze. Even the Emperor hesitated. Intervention will alter the course of humanity forever. It already has, Tatsuya replied. My presence has introduced new variables. If you do not adapt, those variables will destroy you. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor took a risk. His psychic field shifted, opening the slightest fraction. A channel. Permission. Tatsuya stepped forward, raised his hand, and touched the Emperor's armor. The universe convulsed. Warp energy surged through him with impossible ferocity, yet he processed it with machine-like precision. He redirected power flows, sealed micro-fractures, corrected distortions in the Golden Throne's psychic lattice. The throne's failing stabilizers roared to life. The Astronomicon brightened. The warp screamed in fury as its influence over the Emperor weakened. The Chaos gods felt it instantly. Khorne roared. Tzeentch writhed. Nurgle trembled. Slaanesh shrieked. Something unprecedented was happening. A human, yet not human, was modifying the fundamental balance of the galactic war. The Chaos gods hurled their hatred across the warp, attempting to tear Tatsuya apart, but every attack broke against his psionic core, unable to gain purchase. Roll fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the tidal wave of psychic feedback. Tech priests collapsed. The choirs dissolved in agony, yet Tatsuya continued his work with calm precision. He mapped the entire structure of the throne, identifying inefficiencies and repairing them one by one. Minutes passed, then silence. The Emperor's psychic field stabilized. The warp distortions receded. The Astronomicon blazed brighter than it had in 1,000 years. Tatsuya stepped back. The Emperor's message reached him, quieter now, but steady. You have bought humanity time. Tatsuya bowed his head slightly. The structure is improving, but the galaxy remains unstable. I will continue my analysis. Raoul rose unsteadily, staring at him in disbelief. What are you planning to do now? Tatsuya surveyed the repaired but still fragile psychic architecture of the Imperium. Correct the rest of the galaxy, he said, one system at a time. The Emperor's final message resonated through the chamber, neither approval nor refusal, but acknowledgement. Then the galaxy will change. And Tatsuya turned, calculating the next variable in a universe built upon endless war, intent on stabilizing a grimdark reality that had never known balance, order, or peace. The correction had begun.